Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. We are here to discuss the issue of what is happening to the Palestinian people of Gaza. The situation is very bad. And to make matters worse, we live in America, and what's happening in America is what we're seeing constantly every single day. Is we're seeing schools, universities, workplaces, billboards, signs, YouTube advertisements that are basically saying one thing and one thing only. Israel has a right to defend itself. Support Israel. Go and raise funds so that we can give it to the military so that they can go and bomb and attack the people of Gaza. This is the sad reality. What is happening today? But what's really important is to understand that there are three aspects of why this situation is so important and why it's so dear to the hearts of Muslims everywhere. Reason number one, this is a matter of justice and injustice. This is a matter of oppression. When a group of people are being oppressed, when innocent people are being killed, and people are not even understanding who's being killed, why are they being killed, and there's no value for even their lives, for their blood. No one seems to care. Many people don't seem to care. They can't even make one statement. Even the president cannot make one statement in support of the innocent people that are losing their lives and that are about to be killed. We have an issue of unjust oppression. And injustice should concern each and every single Muslim and each and every single person in the world. The second reason why it matters is because the majority of these people, almost all of them that are being killed, are our Muslim brothers and sisters. And of course, everyone's life, Muslim or non-Muslim, is equal in terms of the prohibition of killing them. There's no doubt about that. The lives in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is equal. But there's an extra concern and care that a Muslim has for another Muslim. There's an extra responsibility that a Muslim has for another Muslim. And the third reason why this is so important is because where this is happening, right outside of Jerusalem, which is the third holiest place for Muslims in the world. First is Mecca, the second is Medina, and the third is Jerusalem because of Masjid al-Aqsa, that's there. And this is all connected with what is happening in Gaza, what is happening to the Palestinian people, and what is happening over there. So we're going to have three components to this program. The first component is the history, the intellectual and historical understanding of what is going on. Because a lot of people don't understand what really has happened throughout history, and it's very hard for them to contextualize and say, yes, people are being killed, but what exactly is going on? Why is that, if some rockets are fired, but then there's people dying on both sides, this is really bad. But when you zoom the camera out, and you look at the whole story of who has the military might? Who has the land? Who has the power? What is Gaza? Why are the people there? Why don't they have the ability to fight back? Why does one side have airplanes and tanks and the other side doesn't have any of that stuff? What is going on? It is very important to understand that history. So the first segment is going to be the history of Palestine. So that at least a summarized version. Sheikh Haifa told me not to go all super academic on everybody. It's what I love to do myself, but I'm going to try and keep it fairly simple. And then the second part is going to be spiritual. We're going to talk about how should we as Muslims process this. How are we supposed to understand this? Not only what can we do, what are we supposed to think? What are we supposed to feel? Do we just feel sadness? Do we feel rage? Do we feel anger? What do we do with that? How do we get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are the lessons that we are supposed to learn? And then the third segment is going to be the political activist segment. And that is going to be Brother Hussam, who's on his way right now from another event. And he's going to talk about what can we actually do? What can you and I actually do on the ground today in our own circle of influence to actually help the situation, help the Palestinian people, help the cause, help establish and promote justice. So let's start with segment number 1. I've already taken 5 minutes. So, history of Palestine. Palestine, let's go back. We're in the year, what's the year this year?
2023.
2023, thank you. So if we go back over 100 years, what we're going to see is that Palestinians have been living in this region, what we call Palestine and Israel, in this region for centuries prior to that. And in this region, what has happened was, if you go back, these Palestinians are known as people who speak Arabic. They are people who have developed their own dialect of Arabic. They have their own independent culture. And people would call them Arabs just because they were speaking Arabic, but they had a very distinct ethnicity, a very distinct personality, and they've been living in this land for centuries. Going back to over 100 years, to the late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire, if you know a little bit about history, the Ottoman Empire controlled this region known as Palestine. And in 1897, this is when things began to change. There was a man by the name of Theodor Herzl. He started a movement called the Zionist Movement. And the Zionist movement in 1897 was an idea that says we need to make a Jewish state. We need to make a place where Jews from around the world can come and they can live there. And one of the reasons why he wanted to do this is because Jews were being oppressed in Europe. Jews were being oppressed in Russia. Not really in the Ottoman Empire, not in the Muslim lands. These are in the Christian lands. In the Western lands, Jews, there was a high level of what they call today anti-Semitism, which technically, Arabs are Semites, so to be anti-everything. Basically anti-Jewism, anti-Jewishness. So they were attacking them, they were harassing them, and they said, we need to establish our own homeland. So the first idea was, let's pick Uganda as a country for all Jews can move there and establish their Jewish state. And then they said that's not going to work, so they said, let's look into Argentina. After Argentina, they said, you know what, let's go with the third option. And the third option was, let's pick Palestine as the place where we're going to establish our Jewish state. And we want our own land, our own state, our own people, because they're being harassed and they're suffering in different parts of the world, primarily in Europe and in Russia, by the Christians. Simultaneously, around the same time, there's a movement by the Arabs, different Arabs in different countries, that they were thinking, you know what? This Ottoman Empire, we're not sure if we want to stay with these guys anymore. We would like to go ahead and split from the Ottoman Empire, and we would like to go and take over this land and claim Palestine for ourselves and make a greater Arab state at the same time. You have a third party that is interested in Palestine, and that is the British. And the British Empire was a very powerful empire. They'd controlled, taken over and colonized many different countries in the world. So what happens, we fast forward a little bit, 1916. Okay, this is after World War I. The Arabs and the British decide that we're going to team up and we're going to take Palestine from the Ottoman Empire for ourselves. And what's going to happen is, the British, why are they interested in Palestine? Because if you look on a map, unfortunately I lost my laptop, I forgot it somewhere, so I don't have the slide with me anymore. But if you look on a map, if you know a little bit about geography, you have the United Kingdom, or you have Britain over here, and then you have Palestine over here, and then you have India over here, which Britain was controlling. So they wanted to have a trade route that is going through to make it all the way through India. So it's very important for them economically and politically to occupy this region and to dominate it. So they said, you know what, what's the best thing that we can do? Instead of just controlling it ourselves, let's make a deal. We'll support, if the Arabs revolt against the Ottoman Empire, we will say we're supporting you, we'll revolt together, we'll get Palestine out of the Ottoman Empire's hands, and we will give you Palestine, and you give us special economic privileges of passage and all sorts of things for our own political benefit. And they made an agreement in 1916. 1 year later, 1917, the Arabs fought against the Ottoman Empire. 1917, 1 year later, the British decide to betray the Arabs after they actually supported them, and they issued a declaration called the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration basically said, we are giving the Zionist movement a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Sorry, Arabs, we really thank you for what you did, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to give this land to the Jews instead. And what's interesting is, if they gave it to the Arabs, the Palestinian people live there. The Zionist movement, the Jews don't actually live there yet. So they said, we're going to give this for a future Jewish state of Jews who don't even live in the land right now. But we're going to go ahead and let you have it anyways. There's going to be Palestinians who remain there, but they're going to be non-Jewish communities and they don't get political rights. They'll have some other things they can do, but they will not have any political participation. In 1922, the British Empire occupies Palestine after the World War is concluded, and now the British are in control of Palestine. So just look at some of the numbers here. 1922, when the British occupy Palestine, there are 83,000 Jews. In 1931, about 10 years later, there's 174,000 Jews. So they start moving in. But how many Muslim and Christian Palestinians are there? 851,000. So the overwhelming majority of this entire region are Palestinians, Arabs, they're Muslims, as well as Christians amongst them as well. So then what are you supposed to do? What is the mandate? The mandate is, well, the Palestinians, they just need to move away. They need to make way for the Jews who are moving towards this land. So what happens is there's the Nazi movement that begins in Germany. And almost everybody knows about Hitler and the Nazi movement. It's part of standard curriculum. And what are they doing? They're persecuting the Jews. And the Holocaust is taking place. And the oppressed Jews start to move en masse from Europe into this land of Palestine. And then the Jewish settlers start taking over Palestinian land where Palestinians are actually living there. So from 1936 to 1939, the Arabs decided, this is not fair. This is our land. We've lived here for centuries. These are our homes, our villages, all of these things. So they said, you know what? We're not going to take this. We need to revolt. So they started by protesting. And they started by saying, we're not going to pay taxes to the British anymore, because the British are still controlling this area, but they're giving all the rights for the Zionist movement to move in and make their own Jewish land. The British crushed this revolt by sending 30,000 British soldiers to go and attack and destroy. So they started air bombing villages. I want you to understand, what's happening right now is not new. The British in 1939 are taking the airplanes and they're bombing Palestinian villages. They're demolishing Palestinian homes. And they say, you guys need to be quiet and you need to live under our domination and under our rule. Now the British, and just think about 30,000 troops at that time, by the way, this is more than all the soldiers the British had in the entire region of India. And India is huge. More troops over there to crush this rebellion than they had even in India. So the British are doing this. And then the British realize, they said, we can't constantly do this. If you look at the British Empire, they're a tiny little country. And they've colonized all these other countries. So, they're clever people, not always for good motives, but they have organization and all that. So what do? They said, let's train these Zionist militias so that they can go and fight on our behalf and for their own behalf, and they can start keeping these Palestinians from rebelling against British rule. This is what happens until 1939. 1947 comes. Britain, we got World War II breaking out. Britain now is struggling to keep control of Palestine. They're struggling to keep control of all of the territories because colonialism is coming to an end. In 1947, the Jews are 33% of the population of Palestine, because they've been moving and they've been moving and they've been getting out from Germany and they've been getting out from all these other places. So they've been moving in the area. Now they're up to 33% of the population, and they own 6% of the land of Palestine. The British say, we can't deal with this anymore. We're just going to go ahead, and there's a problem going on here. We're going to go ahead and just hand this over to this new body that just was created after World War II called the United Nations. And say, United Nations, you guys figure out what to do with this situation. We don't want to deal with it anymore. So they give it to them and they say, you solve this problem. The United Nations makes a decision. And they say, our solution is we're going to partition this land of Palestine into two places, two states. There's going to be one state is a Jewish state, one state is an Arab state for Palestinians, and Jerusalem, because it's such a special land that Muslims consider to be holy, Christians consider to be holy, Jews consider to be holy. So we're going to make this region of Jerusalem will be controlled by the United Nations. Now here's the problem. The problem with this idea is they make a decision of what's going to happen. Palestinians still, despite all of the immigration, people coming in, the Jews moving into this land, they are double the population of the Jews. But the United Nations says the Jews will get half of the land. Not only will they get half of the land, they get some of the best land, meaning the most fertile land where all the crops grow and everything like that. All land is not the same. Right? If you go buy some land in Palmdale, it's very different than buying land in Irvine. You can see the difference. So you can't say like, oh, half the land, half. It's not just half. It's like you're getting this stuff, you're getting Palmdale, and we're getting Irvine. Very, very different. So, and the Palestinians said, this is not fair. This is unjust. We've been living on this land, and you're just going to just basically hand everything over, and we're losing everything. 1 year later, 1948, the Zionist militias that had been trained and armed by the British, they're well trained by now. And they started a program called Plan D, Plan Dalit. And you can go and read about this in history. And what their plan was, they said, we're going to go and we're going to destroy the Palestinian villages that are outside of the Jewish state borders that the United Nations handed to them. So we're going to go outside in the Palestinian, the Arab state that they gave, and we're going to go and start destroying those villages one by one. And they started with one of the worst massacres that happened was Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin, they went in there and they massacred every single person. And they took pictures. And what they did was they lined up the women, the children, they stripped them naked, and they massacred, and then they photographed them, and then they killed them. And why did they do that? Why would you photograph something like this? What in the world is going on? They took these pictures, and they went around to the other villages and said, if you don't want the same thing to happen that happened in this village, all of you get out. You get out, or this is going to happen to you. Now today, we know a lot about American history because documents get declassified after 20 years, 40 years, 50 years. The documentation from this massacre is still unclassified. It's not being revealed by Israeli army or Israeli military, Israeli intelligence. So the United Nations report, these are the things that were happening. So they said, either get out or the same thing is going to happen to you. This started what's called the Nakba. The Nakba is known as the catastrophe. It's a calamity where what happens is you have hundreds of villages that are being destroyed by these paramilitary forces. You have 200,000 Palestinians that are forced to flee their homes, forced to flee their villages, and they started going into all the neighboring countries, into Egypt and into Jordan and into Syria and all of these different places. 1948, one more year afterwards, the British decide, you know what? We are officially leaving Palestine. We don't want to be Palestine anymore. And as soon as they did that, the state of Israel was declared by the Zionist movement. And they said, we are now a state, and we're declaring ourselves as being a state of Israel. They were recognized by the British, they were recognized by the United States. And what ends up happening is that the neighboring Arab countries, they declared war. And they said, you know what, this is unjust. We have all these Palestinians that are coming in there. We're going to fight. Long story short, they lost the war. And when they lost the war, more Palestinians were forced to leave all of their lands that they've been living on for centuries. When a war ends, normally, when the war is over, you're allowed to come back to your home. The Palestinians are not allowed to come back to their home. And what they did was, the villages that they destroyed, they took the names of those villages and they changed the names from Arab names to Hebrew names. Then they took trees and they started planting trees so that this entire region becomes a forest, so nobody even remembers that there used to be a village in this area. To hide up and cover up so that nobody ever thinks of ever trying to come back to this entire area. So this is what was happening, and this is what's known as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. You have 15,000 Palestinians were killed, 6,000 Israelis were killed, and 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their lands. Over 500 villages were destroyed. The United Nations plan gave Israel 56% of the land, but Israel captured more land and actually ended up getting 78% by the end of this time. What remains for the Palestinians is the West Bank and Gaza, the Gaza Strip. And that is exactly the history we're talking about right now. We have 6 million Palestinians that are displaced. They are living in basically open air prison type of concentration camps. Gaza and the West Bank is in that region. So this is why, this is a little bit of history, that this is why when Israelis are celebrating Independence Day and saying this was the day in which Israel began, what are Palestinians doing? They're mourning the Nakba, the great catastrophe where their villages were bombed, they were forced out of their land, and they say this is the start of what happened in 1947, 1948. This history needs to be kept in mind whenever we're reading anything about the news that is taking place. So for those of you who know a little bit, some of those who didn't know anything, now at least you know what Palestine is. You know who Palestinians are. You know a little bit about the Balfour Declaration. You know about the Zionist. These are some terms you should know. You know about the Zionist Movement. You know about why Palestinians are living in Gaza and the West Bank. And this should help you contextualize things. Now, we're going to move, inshallah, to Sheikh Haifa. We'll take questions at the end.
Okay.
Jabir, take questions at the end. So we'll move on to Sheikh Haifa, and then we'll have Brother Hussam here give the political aspect of what we should be doing, inshallah. Sheikh Haifa.